Happy Friday, everyone. Happy Black History Month. Hope you all are doing well. I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am so excited to host today's Intentional Conversations VodCast and cannot wait for you to get to engage with and hear from our amazing guest co-host. Just want to give it a moment to let us all get settled into this virtual learning space. We have been expecting you, as we do every Friday around this hour, and we don't take it lightly that you decide to spend time with us. And so if this is your first time, we love to shout you out. Please let us know in the chat where you're joining the conversation from. I'm seeing many familiar names of folks that are routinely a part of this community, which we're always grateful for. So thank you, thank you. I do have closed caption available today for those that may benefit from such. That's our way of showing up for disability inclusion. So wanted to make sure I put that into your hearing. Cameras today are not required, but they are encouraged. We always love to see smiling faces, but we know that sometimes you just want to be here just to kind of listen in, and that's okay too. So whatever capacity in which you're joining us today is totally fine. We're just glad that you are here. We're going to get started momentarily. And again, I'm Dr. Nika White. I want to thank my team for always being available and great stewards of this virtual learning space and making sure that this experience is pleasant for all. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations VodCast. That's right. Let the conversations begin. So for those of you who maybe are new to Intentional Conversations VodCast, this is where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. And we bring on amazing guest co-hosts who are practitioners in this space doing amazing work so we can center their voice and the work that they're doing. And we're always glad when people show up because it says that you value this time and you are certainly interested in what we have to share. So thank you for being a part of our community. So February, we all know, is Black History Month, but Black History, Black Excellence is 365, and we have to continue to amplify that. I do want to make you aware that in honor of Black History Month, I write for both Forbes and Entrepreneur, and so 2 articles have dropped this week. I'm going to ask my team to place those links into the chat, one of which is 5 qualities of Black excellence overlooked in the workplace. I want you to take a look at that. Let me know your thoughts. I'm sure many of you will agree. Black excellence is all around. And then the next one is Black History DEI and becoming a true ally. So I hope that you will take a look at those 2 works and find ways, 365, to honor the Black excellence that occurs every single day. So I want to just share our great gratitude. Many of you that are joined here this morning, you also were a part of the virtual book launch, Inclusion Uncomplicated event that took place yesterday evening. And the book is now available, and not only in hard copy, but it's available on Kindle. It's available in audiobook. And so go pick it up anywhere where you like to purchase your books. And be sure that you share with me your thoughts. I would love to be in conversation with you about some of the takeaways from the book. So thanks in advance for all of your support. And I also just mentioned before that if you did not make it to the virtual book launch event, the replay is available. And so for those of you who want to be able to catch that, we have the wonderful Minda Harts to MC that event. And so it was really well received. And I want those of you who were not able to join live to have the benefit of catching that. So we're going to place the link into the chat and invite you to please check that out. Now that we've done the virtual book launch event, there are a lot of people in the local community. I'm based in Greenville, South Carolina. And so we're going to be having an in-person book launch event next Thursday from 5 to 7 p.m. All of the details are here on the screen. But for those of you who are local and you want to come and actually have me to autograph your book and sign and take pictures and talk with you and share a little bit about my journey, I would love it. And so please mark your calendars. And we're going to place the link into the chat because you do have to register for that event. Again, those are for my local folks. Now, it seems like all things this week is inclusion uncomplicated, and rightfully so. My pub date was Tuesday, so we have really been on this high of communicating so much around the excitement of all of the supplemental learning experiences that are coming as a result of inclusion uncomplicated. But one of which that the general public has ability to sign up for and be a part of is a live discussion with myself, as well as my colleague, Cosette Strong, who serves as our Senior Director of DEI Strategy and Design. We're going to have this 2-hour learning experience, which is going to be really immersive. It's going to be inspired by so much of the content in the book. So if you're looking for a learning experience, come join us, sign up for it. It's not until April, so you have time to get the book, read it, and come prepared to engage. Now, one of the things we like to do here at NWC is give you a little bit of what you can expect in the future weeks to come with our Intentional Conversations podcast. And so I want to do that at this time. Next week, my colleague Cosette Strong will be leading and hosting the Intentional Conversations podcast with guest co-host Monique Gibson. If you don't know Monique, look her up. She is amazing. But we're going to be discussing the journey of Black females who leave corporate jobs to start their own businesses. That's me. That would be me. I did that. And tools available to make them successful. So look forward to that conversation on next week, February the 10th. And then the week following on the 17th, I will be back as your host, and I will be welcomed by Erica Shaw, who's going to be joining me. And we're going to be talking about multicultural talent needs in order to be successful in the workplace, inclusive leadership. And certainly Erica has a big passion and focus on coaching women. So she's going to talk to us a little bit about her strategies for doing that effectively. And then we're going to round out the month on February 24th with Melinda Brianna Epler. Also look her up, another amazing practitioner in this space. But we're going to be talking about why it's important to not just have empathy, but to show empathy, and why empathy is so essential for allyship and the connection between empathy and trust. It really is that bridge of connection, and at the center is trust. And so we look forward to that conversation on February 24th. Now, for those of you who have been a part of our podcast, you know that one of the things we like to do is, before we bring on our guest co-host, is to read the official bio of our guest co-host. And this is because we want people to know the accolades, the credentials that our guest co-host is going to be bringing to today's conversation. So help me to welcome. You know what to do. Go to the chat, find those emojis, get ready to find those words of affirmation and appreciation. But I'm going to read Amber's bio right now. Amber Thompson, as she goes by she, her pronouns, is the founder of D-Bias, an equity-focused monitoring and evaluation platform connecting business outcomes to social issues. She has 10 plus years designing systems with a focus on data accountability that helps create metrics to mitigate unfair practices. She believes the answers to companies' most complex problems exist within their community, and change should center historically excluded people holistically. I love that. Should center historically excluded people holistically. Who are you centering in your efforts, in your conversations? Her process to accelerate change includes using technology to automate data collection, generate root cause analyses, and monitor progress. She has helped organizations develop equity board policies, proactively address organizational challenges, engage marginalized communities, develop the processes to distribute resources fairly, and change policies and procedures to create equitable and just practices. Amber is a published activist and a public speaker on topics regarding equity and justice across all industries. She holds a bachelor's degree in behavior sociology from Point Park University and a master's degree in organization development and change from Penn State University. So y'all know what to do. Let's go to the chat, pull those emojis out, whatever you can do, but let's make sure that Amber feels very welcomed into this virtual community and space. We are so glad you are here. And one of the first things that we often like for our colleagues to do, especially our guest co-hosts, is to, in their own way, just greet this audience. And specifically what you have to share with us while you're greeting the audience in your own way is at least one thing that we do not know about you, or we could not find out about you from reading your bio, or even maybe your LinkedIn profile. So we need you to dig deep and help us to have a deeper connection to you, Amber. Welcome, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Nika, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning, or wherever you're joining in the world. One thing that you would not be able to find about me on social media is sushi is my favorite food. I wouldn't call myself a foodie because I feel like other folks who say that, but I enjoy a nice dish. And some quality sushi from somewhere on a coast in the world literally brings me joy. And if there's any time in the world or any time in my life my brain shuts off because it does not turn off, it's when I'm eating a great dish.
Yeah, eating a great dish.
Yes, a great dish. Brain is focused on food only.
I love that. I love that you're a foodie because I'm a foodie as well. But I have to tell you, even though I'm a foodie, I'm not a fan of sushi. And it's such a sophisticated dish that I wish I liked it, right? I'm like, I want to like sushi so bad, but
Yeah.
I don't. But I'm always admired by people who are also foodies and they just like so many different types of food. So if you like sushi, like our guest co-host today, Amber, then y'all know my favorite color is purple. So please like a purple heart into the chat, but let us know that you're tracking with her on the sushi deal. So that's good to know. Thank you so much for sharing. So I want to jump right in. And while I've shared your accolades and your credentials, I think it's so important for us to level set around your path into this work that you do. What was your background and why did you gravitate very specifically towards the niche work that you do in this broader space of equity and justice and inclusion?
I think whenever we talk about people's experiences, we tend to just focus on like their experiences as existing in the world and not just like their communities they came from. I'm from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, small rural town, steel town, and like in the middle of PA between Philly and Pittsburgh. And I had a great childhood, but I'd had a lot of struggles. And through that time, my family has always been the type of people, everyone works in social work in my family. It's regardless of what degree they have, they work in some form of social work. So I've always come from a social work background with family, people who want to help people in some capacity. Then once I became an adult and started going to college, I started to understand like how that environment started to become, I wouldn't say a barrier because I feel like that's very defeatist, but the struggles were real. Then I had a child with a disability. My daughter's epilepsy and an intellectual disability, and navigating her worlds because it's multiple things that I'm doing simultaneously with her. If I have all this education, all this support, I have a massive support for just for my one child. If I'm struggling to do this, what is everyone else who doesn't have these resources doing? So then, I would say it just kind of propelled me into really honing in on systems thinking and meshing my passions around social work and into the business. What is actually helping things contribute to the struggles that I'm experiencing, my child's experiencing, my family's experiencing, or my friends are. So it's been a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for vulnerably sharing so much of your story. It helps us to have perspective of how you like to show up to this work. And yeah, I'm paying attention to the chat, and one of our guests is saying that, yeah, as a special needs mom, I feel that so hard. And so your message is definitely resonating with some members of our audience today. So as I was reading your bio, the word equity and justice kept coming forth, right? And so I do want to level set a little bit in the beginning and help us to all just be centered on how those words kind of intersect. And so as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, talk from your vantage point as to how those words intersect and specifically hone in on why you have felt the need to really be intentional about amplifying the equity and the justice piece.
I feel as though whenever we say DEI, because most people think linearly, which means they think step 1, step 2, step 3, that they see it as step 1, step 2, step 3, where like we have accessibility and justice, and we have many more other intersections that we're not even including just in those DEIs that we get lost in really trying to understand what our objective is. And where I feel like, D and I are focused on representation. How can we get more representation? How can we help represent more people? the equity, why I really focus on equity and justice is justice allows us through that lens to understand who we're doing on behalf.
Mhm.
And it's not just representation of those folks. It's what are we doing? What are those folks saying we need to do? And to me, equity is the thing that allows our chaotic world to be able to organize what we're doing to achieve justice on behalf of those folks. And we use diversity inclusion as other metrics to achieve it. But
Right.
diversity inclusion aren't the end goal.
Absolutely.
That's where
Yeah.
that's coming out.
No, I love that. And I am in total agreement that justice is the outcome of DEI work, period. And specifically, to just hone in on what you just shared, Amber, is the equity piece that I think helps to show forth that level of justice in many ways. And so I often find it appropriate to kind of intersect how all of these constructs really work together, because while they are distinct, they certainly play a role in this broader conversation. So it's important for us to make sure that as people are tossing those words around, they kind of know where they fit. And quite honestly, if anyone in this space is doing this work without justice being the end goal, then is it truly the work? Is it truly the work, right?
No, no,
And
it's
so,
not.
yeah, exactly.
Rhetorical or
No,
not.
I'm with you. We're answering a rhetorical question, right? No, it's not truly the work. Okay, so we know that there's a lot of talk right now around the economic downturn and all of the ways and the implications that that's going to bring to many different organizations. We're seeing it a lot in tech right now, but we're seeing it across, different organizations in general. And so I want to get your thoughts and perspective on what do you say to some of those leaders who are having to make some really tough decisions right now as they're prioritizing where their resources should go, and they have DEI as part of that consideration set on the list. What do you say to those individuals?
So how I'm processing what's going on in the downturn is something I think before this happened that I've always struggled with, working in DEI roles, but also working under chief diversity officers. And I've worked in spaces where those CDOs were specialized in their industry, and they were a chief diversity officer of their industry. And I think in this downturn, DEI folks need to specialize in an industry or specialize in something in that in the work, right? And to me, it can't be culture based. I think that's where we're struggling, is that we're bringing so much cultural work to this that we're not processing in our industry what the culture, what's not happening in that culture, or what culture is not happening in that industry. So if I was in the DEI space of manufacturing, I would list like manufacturing as the work that I've been doing versus like what I'm good at in regards to manufacturing, whether it's recruitment or whether it's operations. We really need to understand that cultural work from that industry and specialization, and not just be like a DEI person. And that to me
Yeah.
is really where the watering of our work is coming from. And we're being scapegoated as diversity officers versus like a person who practices law or is an accountant with a DEI lens. That in this downturn, let's take time to really beef up the work we're trying to do and understand the injustices and the cultural work in our industries, and come back with that lens versus just being a diversity person.
Yeah, no, I want to lean into that. And I love that you brought that to the conversation. One of the things that I am always so delighted by is my visits during these conversations. Every Friday, I'm learning something new. And this is a perspective that I have not been in many conversations with other practitioners on. And I think that you're right. I mean, I even consider myself, I am, our firm is more of, we're DEI generalists in this sense. There's so much under the broad umbrella of DEI. And so we have fashioned ourselves to, market ourselves as we want to help organizations get to the next level of their journey, knowing that each person's journey is different, right? Each organization's journey is different based upon where they are in this broad continuum of DEI work. But what I'm hearing you say, and I have noticed this in general, just around the DEI space, is that as it becomes more and more saturated, we do have to think a bit more intently about what is the point of differentiation that we're offering? What is that specialization that then allows us to be even more tailored and targeted and customized to drive towards solutions that are sustainable? And so I love that. And we often have a lot of people that will join these conversations. And by the way, we are also live on LinkedIn, so I want to acknowledge that audience as well. And they're looking to break into this DEI space, right? They're looking to find their path. And so I think this is a great reminder to consider, what specifically within this broad work do you want to brand yourself as, and do you want to carve out that very specific niche? So, and I feel like you've done that for yourself, just within the accountability work and the evaluations and the metrics. And so, do you mind kind of elaborating from your perspective how that fits your situation?
Yeah, so a lot of, even with my undergrad and what I did in grad school, a lot of the work I've been doing was measuring, but I would say in a non-traditional sense that I thought was normal. I'm not thinking like, oh, like qualitative, I'm learning about qualitative data in high school. Why wouldn't qualitative data be real data in grad school or in the real world or in research, And I think like when we're talking about this downturn, where I came in, I said, this is what I want to do. I can't come in here generalizing as a consultant.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I don't have the capacity to. And then it also allowed me to be able to partner with other folks that do trainings and coaching, things that I don't really like to do, but also aren't my strengths. I do them to offer for my clients and the work that I'm doing. Because when I'm passionate at it, I am good at it. But I can now, I can focus on the metrics where a lot of folks struggle. I can focus on the analysis where a lot of folks struggle. And I can bring other colleagues into the work that I'm doing and build a team of other practitioners and consultants who can also just focus on their niches. And then we can build like that superpower, right? It's not a superpower, but it feels powerful to know that, I can rely on one of my colleagues, Callista, who does like a ton of great trainings, and she can rely on me to make sure her trainings go beyond that 5 hours that she's spending with those folks. Or my colleague who does coaching, same thing. Like she knows, well, if I'm doing coaching, Amber's monitoring and evaluating what we're trying to get this team to do. So that to me is where in this downturn we need to change our models of working together, and change our models of the type of work we're doing, to really be better at it and get further with it.
I so agree. And, going back to the point of how this space is very heavily saturated right now, there's some pluses and some minuses to that if we were to really just take inventory. But one of the things I will say from a pro perspective about that is if people are doing exactly what you're talking about, Amber, and they're finding their very specific path and niche where they really can become specialized, I do believe that that's an opportunity for us to deepen the collective output of the work, right? And so I'm loving this. And it reminds me of conversations that I've seen over the past several months around a little bit of criticism that certain DEI practitioners are not doing the work effective enough based upon someone's perception, right? And part of what I want to call in for those who think that way is there's too much work to be done. I think there's a place for all of us. I really do. But I think that the way to really optimize that place for all of us is to do exactly what you said. How can we collaborate and to become much, much better informed about what are your specialties within this broad work? Because there are a lot of them, right? And then create those alliances. And so I'm loving this conversation. So thank you so much for giving us a chance to kind of dig into this.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the downturn, and it's not like this is the first time that we've gone through this. Of course, we had the recession back in 2008. What did that last recession tell us about DEI's importance?
In the last recession, in comparison to now, the type of awareness we have now compared to then, I also think companies handled the last recession better than this recession. So if we're going to talk about what DEI told us then, it was like that heavy focus on one person owning DEI is
Yeah.
it's not sustainable. It doesn't work, because now we've moved to that model. We have companies handling it worse. And just like you said, a lot of folks are putting this pressure on DEI practitioners, consultants, ICs, internally and externally. That's because we've been scapegoated based on this business model.
Yeah.
And what we and not to say there weren't diversity officers, there were in very large corporations like Shell or Microsoft, but they also had like 100 people teams. Like they process DEI as an enterprise a product versus like a vertical department. So I think what that last downturn told us was we cannot have diversity as a silo. We need to have it. Every person needs to be a chief diversity officer horizontally. Yeah.
I agree. Yes, this work belongs to all of us. I say that all the time. And I love that you mentioned that, because you're right. The beauty about DEI is that it is horizontal, it's not vertical. And so, yeah, I would love the day when everyone's job description will have something permanently as part of its fixture that's related to owning and being accountable for that work. It doesn't matter what your title is, what position, and what your tenure and how long. It doesn't matter. It belongs to all of us. And so I appreciate that. Now, again, I want to stay here a little bit longer on this economic downturn, and not that I'm trying to talk it up, because there are some people that are of the persuasion the media is just blowing this out of proportion. Really, there's not a recession that's coming. But nonetheless, we have seen already where a lot of DEI practitioners and the DEI budgets have already started to get cut, right? And so what can chief diversity officers or other equivalent, titles for that position do to continue effectively the DEI work when their budget does get cut? Because there are some people that are like, I love what I do. I'm not in a position where I just want to leave because they're cut my budget. But what can I do? Do I just walk away defeated? Or is there some level of hope in the interim that I could still make some impact?
I think there is a level of hope. It's not going to be in the pockets or the corners of your company that you were used to it. I think this is an external opportunity for folks to, we need data, period, right?
Yeah.
We need to collect data outside of our data analyst teams and our HR departments also. And we need to identify externally. This needs to be an internal, external change. If you are looking at your team dwindling, you need to get information from outside of your organization. To me, you're losing allies in that type of change. You're losing people support around you. You might have your chief diversity officer groups, which is cool, but also the chief diversity officers need to be connected to the grassroots organizations that are also trying to drive the change in your company as well. And whether that's something you do, on the sneak tip, or something you do out in the open, that's something we need to be doing. And we have to connect what's happening at the grassroots to what's happening in the ivory tower.
I love that. And it also amplifies the need to extend the work in very intentional ways, whether it's formal or informal, to others to be able to engage. One of the things that come to mind for me is I recall working with a large organization who had BRGs, ERGs, employee resource groups, business resource groups. And part of what they wanted to do in order to take that body of work to the next level is, okay, we now have been able to impact some really successful change internally, but how can we now have externally impact through this? And what we ended up NWC supporting them with is developing this plan whereby they connected with other large global brands in the same vicinity. And then all of their ERG leaders and participants kind of came together. And it was now more of this community type effort and message of the importance. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And so I love kind of the grassroots, fact that you brought to the conversation. And sometimes I think that we feel like everything has to be all buttoned up and well packaged. And sometimes that can be a hindrance because it keeps us from taking the first step. I've had people to say, where do I start, Dr. White? Where do I start? And sometimes I'm just like, you know what, just start. And then along the way, sometimes you'll be able to figure out, okay, because there's not really a one size fits all approach. We know that. And it certainly takes us being brave enough to be willing to make mistakes and then learn from that and correct it. So I'm loving all of this. Have you seen some ways, Amber, that organizations have been able to effectively build collective action externally outside of their organizations?
That's a great question. And before this, I probably would have said no. But honestly, I've been doing some work with B Lab and benefit corporations. And I think that business, with my background in equity and justice, I want to preface this. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done in regards to benefit corporations. But that model, in some states have this, some states don't. In that model, they're intentional around getting the credit for that connection from corporate to grassroots. So a lot of those organizations like Dr. Myers or Nespresso, they're doing work in communities to inform their point system regarding that benefit corporation title. So I want to say it's a model that I can see the potential. And there are companies that are doing changing their hiring practices drastically, where it's first come, first serve. There are models where their benefits are supporting the gaps in like their struggles to get to work or maintain work or be promoted in work. There are models where they're giving them additional money on top of their paychecks to help them, buy a car, buy a house, those things, right? To close the racial wealth gap. There are models I see the potential. I also see like where they're not achieving what they're going out to achieve because it's not through a justice lens. But I do say models like the benefit corporations like Ben and Jerry's, are in Patagonia, and those companies, they do have an intentionality to be in the community while they're still participating in capitalism. And I see the potential.
Now, those are some great examples, so the mention of B Corp as part of an example, I think is a really good one. And you mentioned sometimes that they are operating with, they're not always operating with the justice lens, and that ends up having an adverse effect for those brands and those organizations because it comes across as very performative. And we know that is something that those who are part of marginalized communities can gravitate to immediately, right? And we're even seeing a visceral reaction to it. So I do think that is critically important for those organizations to think more intently. But yeah, you gave us lots of examples, and I'm glad, because sometimes the best way to learn is for us to make it plain. Let's provide some for instances so people can kind of gravitate to.
Yeah.
So we're going to be shifting in a little bit to take some questions from the audience. I want to go ahead and give you heads up about that. And the way we like to do that here on Intentional Conversations VodCast is invite you to use the raise hand feature that lets us know that you would like to be called upon. We will spotlight you if your camera is on, and we'll allow you to unmute yourself and share your question or comments. But if you also just, desire to have your question presented on your behalf, you can place it into the chat, and we will make sure that we present that on your behalf. And so I'm going to go forward with a few additional questions while maybe this audience is thinking about perhaps what they would like to engage you in on, Amber. So staying with this, the importance of the intersection of activism, justice, and advocacy to this broad DEI work, why is it necessary for DEI practitioners to make those connections? And what are some of the ways that you've seen that have been strong strategies for doing that effectively?
I think it's important. It takes a level of thinking that we have to do to change what needs to happen. these folks are researching specifically on the issues that we're generalized on, right? They might be focusing on issues of accessibility, or issues regarding trans identities in HR practices, right? Or they may be talking about gender issues within operations. They're literally hyper focused. I wouldn't even say focused. They're hyper focused on what needs to change and what the outcome will be. You already know what you need to measure. You already know who you're targeting and what you're targeting. This, in my colleagues in Europe, where, you know, a lot of data can't be collected, folks ask me in the global work that I did, how did I do that? I worked with those people, the people who were hyper focused, who were collecting data, who, you know, I don't need to collect it. I couldn't collect it anyway. But you know who I could rely on? The folks who are like, I need to change my experience with your industry or your company, and here's what I'm demanding of you. And now I know who I need to target. Now I know what the metrics are, and now they're even monitoring it. So it just takes a level of work off of our shoulders if we rely on folks outside of our companies.
No, absolutely. I also think, going back to your grassroots point, that, you know, one important way is that internal DEI leaders can connect the organizational cultural work of equity to activism and advocacy, is to implement, you know, programs like mentoring and sponsorships, right? I mean, when we think about how does justice show forth within the workplace, it is all about centering equity and doing it in a way that really moves the needle. And so we can't forget about some of those other you know, maybe less considered avenues, such as, like, you know, mentoring. And sometimes organizations may not have the wherewithal to create a formal mentoring program, but that doesn't mean that individuals who are allies of this work and really do believe in it can't on their own, you know, extend themselves as a coach, as a mentor, as someone that is providing insight that can help someone with their upward mobility, you know, endeavors. And so what would you like to share related to that, Amber, if anything?
In regards to equity, where it really differentiates from the D&I or the accessibility or even justice, is the policy work, right?
Yes.
When we rely on folks to self-report or self-regulate, we are not going, I'm sorry that we do not live in that world where empathy will ever move the needle. It's not. Most identity, and most white folks can't even be empathetic with me. The definition, empathy it's a real thing within psychology, folks.
It is.
To me, it's like words matter. But the policy making that we need to enact outside of our organizations, and starting with our boards, needs to say, like, hey, we need mentoring and sponsorship. We also need to build this into our personnel policy. Then we need to build it into our job descriptions. We need to build this into a mechanism that we're monitoring annually at our board level. Who have you mentored? How have those mentees moved up in the companies? How have those mentees, like, their economics changed or their networks changed? We need to create that policy and the process to implement the policy, beyond just saying, this is a great idea, let's do this. No, this is actually part of our business model. And for us to be successful in what we're doing, we need to also mentor people to stay in our company, and we need to sponsor people to make our employees and our networks healthier. That is what we need to take.
Period.
That functionality. Yeah.
Yes. No.
From the top
I mean,
down, bottom up.
Yeah, the main takeaway here is that policy drives equity. And, you know, without it, sometimes we go at this work thinking that just changing hearts and minds is going to, in and of itself, change the world. And that's part of it. But my thing is that I would rather someone to be following certain behaviors that can yield that outcome, rather than just have the mindset, but not following the behaviors that can yield that outcome.
Exactly.
So yes, this work cannot exist without that. And so again, I just continue to appreciate how that message is being amplified in our conversations today. So I'm not seeing any hands raised so far, and I am checking the chat. No questions there, but keep thinking on them because you do have still time. So I'm going to talk about technology now. I know that technology finds its way into a lot of the work that you do in terms of helping organizations to really be more effective at organizational change. And so talk a little bit about how technology strengthens organizational change.
So in regards to the world we're moving towards, data is the capital. Yeah. And I'm not sure how else to get that across. But the only way to capture data is through technology. You can do it the tried and true method of, writing and notes and transcription. But of all those things, to build our capacity as practitioners, we should be using technology. And when we're talking about the work and being tired and exhausted at the end of the day, a lot of this work could be done by technology, and people still have to be part of our work in the DEI space. We cannot rely solely on technology if you can't tell, but we could be automating a lot of different things. We could be relying on technology to support our analyses. That costs money. I'm not gonna lie, I spent a lot of money building my algorithms and predictive analyses, but essentially technology allows me to do more work. Like when you're talking about deepening, that deepening happens because now I've been able to offload the way the organizations I work with collect data. I've been able to build my capacity and longevity of my contracts because I don't have to be there anymore to monitor, and those folks can just rely on coaching. Now it's not just project based. It doesn't start when a check comes and it doesn't end when the check doesn't have any money anymore. For us to move the needle, we need to move out of a project based change model, and now technology is allowing us to do that. So yeah, automate whatever you can, and do what you need to do by hand and mouth. But really lean into the different type of tech subscriptions that we can purchase to change the work that we're doing.
Yeah, no, automations are really becoming a significant game changer for a lot of organizations. I also think that there's and I'm sure you hear a lot about this, but there's some criticism that is taking away the work. So I love how you brought to the conversation that that's just one piece of it. You still need the coaching. You still need people actually socializing around what all this means and how to process it and how to directly apply it to the workspaces that they belong to. So, Amber, I want you to give us a little bit of an additional understanding of your equity-focused monitoring and evaluation platform. Give us a little bit of additional insight into that. What are you monitoring exactly, and what can you share?
Basically, where I'm seeing a gap is the actual when we're talking about justice, the amount of work I've done to build a justice lens and through my traditional education and then through my non-traditional education with activism and organizing, most folks are not going through that. It's not happening. And that is where like that humanistic approach, that it fails because there's so much education, just like in the finance industry, that folks don't have the capacity or the brain width to be able to capture every other industry that they may be intersecting as a DEI person. So the way I'm approaching it is by building like a data lake of everything, right? We have the 1619 project. Imagine the 1619 project in 27 different industries, right? And that is where I'm utilizing technology. I'm not going to hold all of this information. I have a ton of information in my head, but to be able to pull that out in the moment, or and I like fast change, and be able to pull that out in a short time period that I'm working with a company is not possible, but with technology it is. So what I've just built is an analysis of people, historically excluded people, and centering them. And our current data models, why algorithms are killing us, is because the way that they rely on the outliers and cleaning out outliers in our data, the things that don't happen often, are our experiences.
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
small numbers. Our experiences are cleaned in the building of algorithms and data. We need a statistical model that doesn't do that. And that's what I'm building.
No, I love that. That is amazing. And I'm hoping that, by you sharing today, we're going to be able to get the word out around your specialty to others that can certainly gain benefit from that. It amazes me how even large organizations, they don't even collect data. I mean, so let's get to like the bare basic minimum of just collecting the data. Let's understand, what is the makeup? Well, we really don't know. We think it's this, we think it's that. So you don't really collect it. And so for those organizations that may not quite yet be ready for the real in-depth, evaluation and tracking that you can provide, what are some just 1 to 2 bare minimum practices that you will say are critical for them to have data that can inform a lot of their strategic decisions that can, be able to create greater equity and justice within the workplace?
Build a policy at your board level that your exit interview data has to be captured, and whatever issues come out have to be rectified within 18 months.
Yeah.
That, to me, the exit interview is the easiest data point, and the one that you probably could build trust in getting before any other piece of data that you can capture in your organization. People are going to be mad when they're coming out. And if you built that trust before and say, like, we're writing a policy to take your information to implement this back into the organization to make changes, and then those folks who are working there or can see that, you're going to retain other folks too.
Oh, absolutely.
Easiest. And
Yeah.
policy writing is not hard.
No, I like that. And I like the fact that you went straight up to the board level. We're not going to play. We're going to go straight up to, especially because many of those boards are governing bodies. Yes, they're setting the strategic direction. And so, yeah, start there. I love that. And would you say, Amber, that maybe the same could apply to stay interviews? I'm a big fan of stay interviews as well. I feel like the exit interviews, they certainly give us some good intel, but at that point, people are exiting, right? And so it will allow you to maybe implement some changes for those that are still there. But I also think that the intentionality of, talking to the folks that you want to retain and understanding what changes maybe need to be considered, that also is a plus. So would you recommend a similar approach for stay interviews?
Yeah, and I want to bring stay interviews back to companies not even collecting data, and possibly why stay interviews without that policy are performative. So I don't want to throw any companies under the bus, but essentially people are intentionally not collecting the data. And a stay interview would be against that intentionality of not collecting the data. So, I mean, that if we look at, what is it, Exxon or Chevron, whichever one came out, and they knew in the 70s, they had down to, because of statistics, they had down to a number what today would look like because of their industry. They were able to maintain and encapsulate that data and protect it from getting out to whatever. And because of the way our information is siloed internally and externally, a lot of activists couldn't prove or show or say they know, right? What, to me, the state interview would have identified the people who were already against them intentionally keeping this information from the organization or from the community at large. So I would say state interviews, yes, but you're not going to get the trust and the buy-in if there isn't a policy to say, yeah, if you tell us something in this interview, you also have access to the change that we are making from this. You also can provide input because we developed this or we've identified this because of your feedback. And there has to be some level of anonymity because there's a major power dynamic. Also, a huge part of equity folks ignore is the power imbalance that we need to reconstruct or reconfigure. There's a major power imbalance in a stay interview without policy. So those are my thoughts. I love state interviews. I like building that in as an equity policy to say, here is the feedback loops and the learning loops, and here's how we collect and evaluate what we're doing quarterly or monthly to inform that. So it's less of like a gotcha moment and more of like, this is how the organization is modeling.
Yeah, of course. Now those feedback loops are so critical. And if you're collecting this data and you have no plans to do anything with it, then you that in and of itself is going to create this mass exodus, right? Because it's going to continue to say to people time and time again, you're collecting this to be performative, but you really don't have any intentions of doing anything with it. So that's where the policy can help close that gap and build up that credibility. I find that a lot of organizations very intentionally do not collect data. And it's because oftentimes, one is they are afraid of the data, almost as though I know we aren't performing at a level where we should. And so therefore, we don't want to have the proof, right? And so I always say, don't be afraid of the data. The data doesn't necessarily mean that immediately overnight, you're going to have to change all the things in all the ways that everybody has requested. These things take time, but it is a great show of transparency, a great show of desire to center the voices of the individuals that are being impacted by your policies or lack thereof, right?
Yes.
So, so I so appreciate where this conversation is going. Okay, so we have a question in the chat, Amber. The question is, how can D&I be a priority for organizations that have other big issues to deal with? Oh, so that's like the whole competing priorities. What advice would you give to those who are trying to identify and work with other DEI advocates at your organization? I think I kind of ran two questions in together, but so I'll go back and start with the first one. How can DEI be a priority for organizations that have other big issues to deal with, other competing priorities? I hear that a lot. We're going through a big org change. We're rebranding right now. We have this other assessment that's going on. We just can't give time to it. So what do you say to that, Amber?
This is where equity comes in, and why D&I, like as a tool for representation, that it's looked at upon, not saying that's what it is, but that's definitely how it's utilized. Equity allows you to look at that rebrand as to why you're rebranding. Equity looks at your organization as why you're reorganizing, right? And equity says, this is what you need to put in to not have to do this again. Or if you do it again, it's less of a punitive and reactive, and it's more proactive, because now your data is telling you this is coming, let's change for the better. To me, that is always going to trump the priorities. Equity is literally the process of you going through your reorganization because you found issues, but the problem is our reaction. These are reactionary issues. Had you instituted some equity policy in anticipation of issues in your industry through a justice lens, you would already have seen that these things were coming, because culturally our world is changing, and not just through race. We have age, we have our cities growing and our suburbs shrinking, we have our infrastructure changing, we have mobility issues growing. Like, there's a lot of things changing that equity should be a priority, so you don't have to do these things reactionary.
So appreciate that. That was really rich. And it goes back to, again, just the acknowledgement that, equity is horizontal. It is not vertical. So whatever it is that you're trying to do, whatever those competing priorities are, equity should be in the center of it. So why are we waiting and putting this as its own separate kind of entity off to the side? And I think that is a great way to help organizations to realize that putting it off is they need to check kind of the mindset around how they're viewing it, right? So yeah, that is spot on. The other half of that question, which probably was a separate one, was what advice would you give to those who are trying to identify and work with other DEI advocates at, their organization?
There needs to be a value alignment across organizations, but more importantly, when folks come together on behalf of an affinity. And I say an affinity, even though a DEI person may be on behalf of multiple affinities, you are focused on marginalized people. There needs to be a value alignment in building those relationships. And this was something that I run into constantly, even today, I have a different value alignment to a lot of folks in the work that I'm doing that we need to balance and we need to identify from the gate. So I know if I'm coming in, oh, this person I'm working with only cares about making money. So this is the relationship that they have to this work. And I only come in making sure it's not only about making money. So this is the value of relationship that I have. So we need to be able to not mesh, because I don't think a person making only money is a good enmeshment, but it's a very good perspective to understand how you're selling other parts of your work that aren't focused on capitalism. So we've come to an understanding in our value alignment to say, this is what we're here for. And regardless if you're here to just make money, fine, we're here to make money. That's not a space I'm going to really involve myself in. But at least I know coming in, that's what's happening. And that needs to happen with all DEI folks. There needs to be a value alignment and a realignment after every major project, after every major issue. There needs to be an alignment that happens for people to know where they're coming from.
That is so good. Values alignment. And there, when we talk about it from an internal perspective within organizations, there are a lot of leaders who will verbalize that, yes, this work is important. We need to do this work. But until that values alignment conversation takes place, you can guarantee that there's a good bit of divergence, right? Because what that looks like to one leader can be vastly different from what that looks like to the next leader. So creating those organizational guiding principles around how are we at the organizational level going to value this work and what does that look like is so important. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm trying to squeeze in as many questions as possible. So Lisa White, who is here with us today, thank you, Lisa. Her question is, what are some policy changes that you have recommended as a result of the data from stay interviews?
I don't particularly call them stay interviews. The way that I build my equity policies is we're monitoring or we're evaluating our programs and our services based on how often change is happening in those. And what the stay interview looks like in that process is a great example. Something happens around accessibility constantly. It's an issue of accessibility for most times around programs and services, right? So in that stay interview, we'll call it a stay interview, but in that evaluation of the program at the end of that cycle, whenever it's closed out or it's getting ready to ramp up again, there's a pause where the team is evaluating their performance on that, or they're evaluating the organization's performance on it, which is really what I recommend. The information that comes out of that is saying, this is how the organization supported me. This is how my team supported me. This is how my leader supported me. This is how I feel like I could have done better if I had these things. These are a lot of these things become accessibility issues to say, I have medicine and I've learned that I can't meet after 5 p.m. Or what's another issue of accessibility that came up? Understanding information delivered virtually. That has been a very huge one, is a lot of people can't see the screens, right? So we need to have a lot of information, and it's agenda planning, right? But a lot of the information provided during virtual meetings is not accessible. In regards to the work itself, like how that goes back into a policy. So accessibility, I built into a policy already. So we're already identifying these things that we need to be changing and logging it so we can expand it from beyond that situation across the organization. A policy that goes back to the top is codifying pay salary, right? I feel like this is how much work we all provided this. We should be equally paid at this. So I'm working in an organization to codify some of the things that they want to do to flatten their decision-making models and spread that work across. That came out of the evaluations of their programs. Some folks are saying we're doing this more. Some folks are saying we're doing this more. Well, we all are sharing the work. I'll be sharing the benefits of this. So that's a great one that has come out.
No, some awesome examples. We're running out of time. We're getting to the top of the hour, but this has been such a rich conversation. There's some other questions in the chat, but I hope that for those of you who maybe did not get your question answered, we did share all of Amber's information, that you will reach out to her, follow her work. I want to give you the last 60 seconds to close this out, and in whatever way that feels appropriate. But I do hope that maybe you could give us a little bit of your fellowship so that we can know what that's about, and what potentially we have to look forward to. Thank you for being here today, Amber. Go for it.
No, thank you, Nika. So I am going to be announcing an engineering fellowship with my organization. We'll be doing 3 a year. What we're trying to do is develop better technologists in our growing world. I'll also be offering, we have not developed our services and products yet. I'll be announcing that next week, where you can just sign up and get an equity policy for your organization and use our technology to evaluate and monitor so you can grow and learn versus waiting till you learn to get the change. I saw a question regarding how would you recommend education. We should be working while we're educating. And that's my model, is not wait, just like you said, just get started. Let's get started, but let's get started in a way that we're informing our steps along the way. So we'll be announcing those things. Follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on social media. I'm accessible. I do take time to respond, not gonna lie, but I do respond to my LinkedIn DMs. So please message me if you have anything else.
I love it. Working while educating. I love it. I love it. Amber, thank you so much. We're grateful that you said yes to our invitation. I do hope that each of you who have joined us today will take advantage of connecting with Amber in all the many ways that we've shared into the chat. Have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully we'll see you all again next Friday. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nika. Bye.